Hello, Michael Lynch. So glad to see you again.
Always happy to be here, Peter. Always looking forward to conversations with you on Palestine.
Michael, I turn to you because of this bombshell report from Francesca Albanese that's just come out, and which has caused Mr. Trump to say he wants her to be fired from her responsibilities. She's got his dander up. That doesn't seem to be too hard to do. But what is new and significant about this report? You wrote several of your own. What's new about this one?
What I think is most interesting about Francesca's new report is how in depth her analysis is with respect to the range of companies across a broad sector of global economy that are intricately involved in either selling goods or investing in goods or otherwise protecting and enhancing the Israeli economy. And when you talk about the Israeli economy, it's impossible to separate the de facto Israeli economy from what goes on in the West Bank and what is going on with respect to the military campaign that Israel is conducting in Gaza. And she brings it all together with respect to pointing to complicity in colonialism and settler colonialism and in apartheid and in genocide.
Would you say that her investigation into the economics of the involvement of American, particularly American companies, but not only big European countries as well, companies as well, also shows to a certain extent what are the forces behind the positions of governments that are ignoring or even complicit with what Israel is doing?
Correct. We who pay attention to Palestine, and particularly over the past 21 months of this genocidal war, have pointed to the complicity of states in Europe and North America and elsewhere in the world, primarily in the global North, with respect to aiding and abetting what Israel is doing. What tends to be lurking more in the shadows is what many of their large companies that are domiciled in the global north are doing with respect to the Israeli economy. She goes through looking at companies that are involved in displacement of Palestinians like Caterpillar or Hyundai. She goes through companies that are involved in support for the 360 plus Israeli settlements, illegal Israeli settlements under international law in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, such as the German Heidelberg Company, or companies that are helping to build the light rail tram connecting the Israeli settlements in East Jerusalem to West Jerusalem. She goes through the occupation tourism industry, Airbnb or bookings.com, which open up rooms to rent short-term or long-term in the Israeli settlements. She looks at bankers and insurance companies. She looks at academia. She looks at agriculture business. She looks at energy or transportation logistics. We have to accept and understand that Israel's got a very advanced economy. It's a European-style standard of living with a GDP per capita of over $60,000 per head in Israel. And it's very well integrated into the global North economy. All of these businesses based in Europe or North America primarily are engaged in businesses and investments that help the Israeli economy do as well as it's doing. She points out how well the stock exchange in Tel Aviv has done over the last 21 months of the war. How many, particularly the Israeli military companies, Elbit in particular, are doing in terms of their shareholding during the course of this war. Virtually any military company in the global north that's doing business with Israel has seen its business increase substantially in supplying planes or missiles or tanks to Israel during the course of this war in Gaza.
Michael, there've been some people have been pointing to our contribution of military sales. But apart from that, does this report point to any Canadian link? Is there anything that's particularly relevant to Canada and Canadians out of the report that she's just published?
Well, to be clear, Francesca herself says, the companies I've identified are some of the largest in the world that are doing business, active business with Israel. But this is only the tip of the iceberg. The only Canadian company she points to is the Caisse de dépôt et placement du Québec, the public sector pension plan in Quebec, which she says has close to $500 billion in pension funds, and that has invested almost $10 billion in companies named in her present report. And it could well be that there's more. I suspect there probably isn't a major public or private pension fund in Canada as one industrial example, which doesn't have investments in these companies that Francesca has mentioned in her current report.
Now, all of these pension funds, I presume, would have some kind of code of ethics about environment or human rights or whatever. Does that play here? Is that a lever?
Of course it is. Virtually every public pension fund in Canada has joined and is a proud member of the United Nations Principles on Responsible Investment. The same thing is true with virtually every university in this country as well. The question then becomes, is your attachment to these principles of responsible investment, of which human rights is a fundamental cornerstone of doing business as a corporate entity or as a public entity, is this simply performance on your part as a pension fund or a university? Or do you actually believe in the principles that are at the heart of these UN principles, and will then make research and investigation as to whether your investments are bettering the world or contributing to the problems of the world?
Mm. And are there any levers that we can use?
I beg your pardon?
What could Canadians do? What
Sure.
levers?
Well, for those people who work on issues of social justice, particularly as it turns to Palestine, what I think we need, to some degree, is more research on what some of these major pension funds, these major corporations in Canada are doing, and with respect to their ties to Israel. Are they investing in companies that have these shady, I can use that word, corporate relations and investment relations in Israel? Are these companies themselves directly involved in investing in Israel or in the occupied territories? All of this, I think, is critical. When you stop and think of it, Israel is a country of under 10 million people, whose economy is heavily dependent on international trade with Europe and North America. The only reason why such a relatively small country, politically and demographically, can wind up ignoring hundreds of UN resolutions directed against it, and can ignore significant rulings coming from the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court, is because they have these intricate investment and financial relationships with states and with companies in the global north. Cut those ties, start active de-investment from the Israeli economy, and you'll start bringing Israel, hopefully, on the right side of international law. When you wind up putting lots of heat on those who are abusing their power, sometimes they begin to see the light.
So is there anything for Canadian unions or Canadian churches in Francesca's report?
Sure, you think of the 30% of the Canadian workforce is unionized. We have some very large, powerful unions, many of whom have actually passed resolutions critical of Israel and supportive of Palestinian rights. Can they use that heightened awareness that these unions have or that these churches have and begin to look at their own pension plans that they're involved in? You think of in Ontario alone, we have public unions who have significant pension plans for their members involved in the healthcare sector, or involved in the municipal sector, or involved in the federal jurisdiction as well. All of this is, if you like, low-hanging fruit for these unions who can show their commitment to wanting to see social justice in Israel and Palestine by beginning to use their weight to have these large pension funds divest from those companies who are involved in Israel.
Thank you, Michael. Michael Lynk, former UN Special Rapporteur, now enjoying not quite retirement because I see you're busy everywhere. But thank you so much for spending a few minutes with us today. That's great.
Peter, thank you so much for having me.